right, Rick, thanks so much for being here with us today. We are in Orlando at the American Seed Trade Association's Vegetable and Flower Seed Conference. What are some of the biggest phytosanitary concerns that are out there right now, and why are they important?
Well, I think some of on the broader scale, some of the bigger concerns are the continued increase in regulations by trading partners around the world. So the more pests or diseases that they add to the list as phytosanitary requirements for seed, then the more seed testing or more other phytosanitary mitigations are having to happen, many of which we believe are unnecessary. So that's the biggest issue. It's just sort of exploding, more and more requirements all around the world. And so that's what we're trying. Now we're trying to come up with programs and initiatives to sort of bring this in a proper perspective. And so we're working really hard with our own regulator, our own USDA here, to come up with new ways to address phytosanitary risk associated with seed. And so it's going to take a while to get some of these new activities and measures and initiatives into place, but we think it's going to be worth it, because the one approach that we're looking at is the system, what we call the systems approach. And conceptually, that means a company, when we get to this point, rather than having every individual shipment certified for international movement, the company would become accredited to ship their products without having to get individual phytosanitary certificates. And so there's a lot of activity going on in that area. It's going to take a long time to get that at a global level, but we have a lot of good things moving in the right direction to do that. So.
And that's a pilot program?
Well, the initiative is still in the conceptual stages, but we've got more clarity now. We actually have the U.S. version of this is called REFRESH, which is an acronym for Regulatory Framework for Seed Health. And we've had a joint working group with the government to develop this. Now we have the conceptual paper, the concept paper completed. And I just got permission this week with APHIS to post that on the ASTA website. So it's a 22-page document that will give our membership a better idea of what this is going to look like and what value it would be to them, because it's going to be voluntary. So we're not replacing the current system of phytosanitary certification in the world, but for companies that do a lot of international trade, they can take a look at this and consider it an investment, if you will. It may be hopefully will be a better way for them to move their seed around the world ultimately, once we get this up and running. But next stages are pilot projects. So we're going to be exploring this year, at least getting 1 to 2 or 3 pilot projects up and running to see how this is going to go.
And is that something that will help kind of expedite phytosanitary certificates so that there's not such a backlog at the federal level?
Yeah, because what will basically happen, there's a couple of ways to go on this. And it's discussed to some degree in the concept paper, but one way is a company gets accredited, and then other countries accept the accreditation, and the seed shipments can come in under that accreditation. Another approach would be to consider the accreditation as equivalent to phytosanitary certification. So you issue a phytosanitary certificate using the accreditation as the additional declaration. So that's another possible way to go. So we'll just have to see how that happens. But for the seed industry, it will be a much more predictable approach to this, because right now there are so many unknowns out there. They get surprised many times when they try to get a permit, or when they try to get a phyto, or their seed shipment gets retested at another port of entry someplace, and other problems occur. So that's what we're trying to ultimately avoid, is ultimate harmonization.
Right.
At the global level. Maybe in my lifetime, probably not. But
You never know. You never know.
That's true.
And so, we talked about what you're working on here with USDA, APHIS, and you've also been working at the international level with the International Seed Federation
Right.
and pulling together some of those lists. Can you talk a little bit more about
Yes,
that?
yes. A couple of projects we have going with International Seed Federation. One is they too have a systems approach working group, and I'm a member of that working group. And the whole idea there is we're collecting all of the different developing concepts that are going on around the world for the systems approach, and comparing them and evaluating them to ultimately come up with a master generic document of saying, well, from the industry point of view globally, this is what the systems approach means, and this is how the industry thinks it could work the best. And so, as I sort of implied, at least the Refresh initiative is the furthest one along. So we're comparing most of these against the Refresh initiative, but looking at the ultimate benefits of all of them together. And this is going to be very important because through ISF and through NAPO, we succeeded in turning in a proposal to the International Plant Protection Convention to develop an annex to the current International Seed Standard, ISPM 38, that lays out the details of a systems approach. And so how the IPPC works is they'll ultimately put this into their work program. They'll establish an expert working group. And at that point in time is when we would like to have this document completed to serve as the guideline or the document, the reference document for that particular annex. So it should shorten the process to get this annex developed. Because normally in IPPC it takes eight years or longer to develop a standard or even an annex, and it's just a very cumbersome process. But the more the industry can get involved to hopefully narrow these time frames down, it makes a lot of sense to do that.
Yeah.
And so, that's one of the projects. And then the other project is what we call the ISF Regulated Pest Database. And ASTA has a companion database I can talk about too. But the Regulated Pest Database, what ISF is doing is they are picking a commodity, a seed species, melons or tomato, whatever it is, and then they collect all of the country requirements at a global level and adding all of these pests up. And so, for example, for tomatoes, the list is well over 200 pests collectively. And so if you're a seed company marketing your tomato seed to 70 or 80 different countries, and all of the requirements are different, and so the first step is to collect all of the available scientific literature and references on each of these pests, and develop information on whether or not seed's a pathway, and if so, under what conditions is it a pathway, and then secondly, what seed health test methods are available or what seed treatments may be available so that we can collect that data as well. And what we're finding out is roughly on the average, 75 to 80% of all these pests that are regulated by these countries are not technically justified because either the plant's not a host or the seed is not a pathway. It doesn't occur on seed, even though it can occur on the plant. Seed's not going to move it around, or it's already in the receiving country or the importing country and not under any form of official control, because that has to be a justification for a quarantine pest. So we're finding out about 80% of these things. And so now what we do is we pull that out of the database and we provide that information to our governments to encourage them to remove these from their requirements, because we all need to focus on the true pests, the ones that everybody, are the legitimate ones. And so that's a big project. And so they've got 12 commodities done, all of them vegetables right now, but they're working on corn and alfalfa is two newer commodities, more complicated ones. So that's going on right now.
Now, when that information is presented to the government, are we seeing governments peel back those layers, or are they resistant?
I won't say they're resistant, but again, you can provide the data, you can provide the information, but it's a country's sovereign right to interpret that themselves too. So there's a lag process in that as well. Oftentimes, the most effective way we do it is when there's an issue with a particular seed shipment with a particular country, we go to that database and collect that information, provide to APHIS in this case, who then can negotiate with that country on a bilateral basis and amend their country regulations. Because as long as we have the science and so forth, then we have a lot better shot. So that's been an immediate value of this. And then on the ASTA side, we have a very similar database, but the difference is our database is built upon the pests that our members identify as having been problems. And so we have pests issues associated with commodities that ISF hasn't worked up yet. Okay, so ours is an amalgamation of many different seed species, but the pests that companies have had trouble with, and we work those databases up exactly the same way, using the same formats, using the same rules, and so forth that we've developed we've worked with ISF on their database, so that, for example, when the time comes that APHIS or ISF develops a database on sorghum, for example, which they haven't done yet, then we can pull out of our database what pests we've already dealt with sorghum, get them right into the ISF database, and then we begin to ultimately merge these together into one system. So,
kind of a seamless approach.
Yeah, right. And so we right now have somewhere between 250 and 300 pests worked up in the ASTA database. So and it's growing, because every time I hear about one that we haven't worked up, then we contribute to resources to get that done.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, that's a very important project. And so we're encouraging other seed associations in the world to work with their governments to use that database, because it's also useful for NPPOs or foreign governments to develop their pest risk assessments on seeds as well. And so using the new ISPM 38 as guidance, and then using the ISF database and the ASTA, what's in the ASTA database, where appropriate, as a major source of information, that's going to have an impact too over the next several years.
Now, what can companies do to help or to contribute to these efforts?
Oh, there's a number of things. I think, first of all, when they get into an issue, we can't help them unless we know what the issue is. And so to contact ASTA, contact us, and we can hook them up with the right people in APHIS or with other governments and so forth through their national seed associations. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is like on the database development stuff, many companies have their experts. So they have pathologists, they have experts in other aspects of this. So we can get them involved in the process of developing these databases. We also, of course, have the ISHI VEG program, which is an industry-driven program through ISF to develop seed health tests for a lot of these different pests. And we rely totally on industry experts as well as some academics for that process. So those folks who have the molecular folks and the seed testers in their companies, if they want to get involved, we would encourage that as well. ASTA committees, we have our Phytosanitary committee, we have our emerging diseases committee in particular, we have our veg tech subcommittee, vegetable technical subcommittee. So we have a lot of avenues, and the nice thing about that is, I mean, it's every individual from a company carries the same weight, of course, going into our committee. So if you're from a small company, you have the same influence and voting rights as somebody who's representing a multinational company in our various committees. So you can influence policy, but it's a good source to understand what's going on a broader level in the phytosanitary world, and oftentimes then we can work together to more involve our membership more proactively in these kinds of issues as well. So lots of opportunities.
So that kind of covers it on the phytosanitary front. One of the meetings that you participate or engage in down here is the Emerging Issues working group, and you guys had a chance to meet yesterday.
Right.
What are some of the things that the working group is responsible for, and what are you watching?
Well, in this particular working group, it's a broad-based group. So when you talk about emerging issues, it could be an emerging phytosanitary issue, it can be an emerging IPR issue, so it crosses it's anything that could impact the seed industry in its broadest sense. And so a couple of things that came up this year, at this particular meeting, Abigail Struxness, who is our new Senior Director for International Programs and Policy, reported out on a new grant that ASTA just received. As you know, with the tariff issue with China, that has impacted a lot of vegetable seed production in China. Because what's happened is of course, a lot of our vegetable seed companies actually produce seed in China. It's owned by them, but it's produced under contract by Chinese growers and that kind of thing. And they bring this seed into the U.S. where it's processed and re-exported and so forth. All those tariff codes involving seeds have now hit the vegetable seed industry, so they're subject to 10% tariffs on their own seed. It's not competitor seed, right, if you will. It's not seed that China is selling to the U.S. It's only seed that's produced in the U.S. So it's a very gray area in the tariff situation. And so the government made available a grant program where organizations or entities could turn in proposals to address issues that are being adversely impacted by the tariff codes. And so ASTA turned in an application, and the one, it was for two projects totaling $1.3 million, and we got the $1.3 million. So our proposal was fully funded, which was very incredible as a matter. But anyway, so the idea of the first part is: are there other countries in the world where our vegetable seed growers could be producing seed that would get them out of China if it got to that point? And so that's the first focus of that. So we're working with our industry to identify a few other countries around the world and to explore what the business environment would be, because it's not just climate. That's a huge factor. So you have to pick countries that have the right climates to grow these kinds of seeds. But then on the other hand, what's the intellectual property scenario in those countries? What are the phytosanitary scenarios in those countries, the seed movement issues in those countries? And so some that may have favorable environments have not so good intellectual property protection or not so good phytosanitary infrastructure. So we're going through that process now. And then the next question would be, well, what can ASTA do to impact corrections or impact improvements in those to make those countries more approachable, if you will, for our membership. So that's one project, and then the other one has to do with the plant breeding initiative, trying to influence the European Union. So we've had some issues with the European Union on the whole idea of plant breeding initiative, these new plant breeding methodologies and so forth. And so the focus there will be how do you communicate, how do you develop a better representation of that kind of technology to the public at large and the regulatory community at large in the European Union. So that'll be in partnership with a few other entities that are doing something similar to that. So that was one major issue that we talked about in the working group. And I also reported on a couple of emerging disease issues, one of which we've organized an entire workshop around for this Tuesday, which is we normally have an emerging diseases committee that we always have here, and we discuss diseases that we have to worry about relative to seed production in the U.S. and so forth. And so we just added a new one to that list. It's a disease called tomato brown rugose fruit virus, and it's just emerging as a major issue.
Tomato brown rugose fruit virus. Okay.
Yeah, and the problem with this virus is it's a new strain or something is going on, but it has overcome the resistance gene that most tomato varieties have for this class of virus called tomatoviruses. And so this gene called the TM22 gene has been the stalwart gene that has been incorporated into most tomato seed varieties commercially. And it's protected against a number of different tobamoviruses. This one's just showed up. It's new to science since 2014. And so now it's emerged as a trade issue, in particular with Mexico. And so we're cobbling together a very quick effort, putting together a research initiative through University of California, Davis, and Iowa State University to address the immediate needs and issues. The first one being to develop a more effective seed health test. Mexico has developed one, but we need to work with them a lot more closely to improve upon that test. And so we're involving Seneca from the very beginning, which is the Mexican Seed Health Lab Test Services branch down there, to help evaluate the method they've developed and explore ways to make sure that that method truly is reflecting the levels that are occurring out in the seed supply these days. And so that's a big one.
Now, are they seeing that disease in Mexico as well, or just here in the U.S.?
Well, we've only seen it in the U.S. In just one incident in the U.S. so far, which is in a greenhouse scenario that's been mitigated. But Mexico has actually seen it in the field. It's actually in tomato production down there. And the tomato seed market is a huge market, not just for U.S. tomato seed producers, but worldwide. And they're all in the same boat on this. And so it's emerging very quickly because it has overcome resistance. And so the answers are, it's going to take a while to develop new resistance to this particular virus. In the meantime, it's mechanically transmitted. It's a very contentious disease once it gets in. So we have to work very hard to develop management practices for this, effective seed health testing methods, and keep it called out of the seed supply as best as we can, at least until, or in addition to getting this new resistance built in. Because even when you find resistance, it's going to take a significant amount of time to incorporate that resistance into our commercial varieties. Mm-hmm. But it's a program that has to come together very quickly, and so that's what ASTA's done initially. We just got involved into this really roughly beginning in September, and so that's why we devoted this workshop to bring our experts together, both academic as well as industry experts together, sit down and try to use that meeting to come up with a consensus plan on where do we go with both research and outreach. And then at the same time, ASTA is intending to do the initial funding through our brush fire fund, our veg and flower permanent research fund, to get this up and running. And then we'll figure out what we need to do from there, but it's step by step. But we think we got a mechanism working, and we think we have the best response we can have right now to move forward with this. And so folks in the tomato world, this is an open meeting to them, and so we encourage them to, if they can, come to the meeting on Tuesday.
Okay. And for our viewers who can't be there, to learn more about it, where should they go?
I think the best would be to come to me, and we'll put some sort of report together that comes out of this meeting, and I'll get it circulated to our membership once we get to that point. But yeah.
Well, that sounds good. There's certainly no shortage of issues that, as you look at the phytosanitary world, but then when you throw some of the trade happenings on top of it, it certainly adds another layer of complication.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Well, thanks so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate it and appreciate all your work that you do.
Thank you.